His fingers slid between her cuffed ankles, and for one frozen instant it was too close, much too close, and she gasped, her teeth tight. Refrain, "That is forbidden." Elias Thane offered no immediate reply. The farmer's hands were rough, sun-baked, firm, like a man used to steering harnesses and fixing old gates. Yet just now they were supporting a woman dangling from an ash branch, her dress pulled by gravity, her breathing coming in sharp, helpless puffs. To any observer, it looked wrong. More than wrong, it looked sinful. The hot season's sun beat down on the Arizona plain. Dust hung in the air like a breath being held. Sister Clara swayed slightly, ropes cutting into her ankles, her reality narrowed to pain, heat, and the strangers standing far too near below her. His hold firmed, her body jumped. She cried out again, softer this time, fear laced with disgrace. Her voice emerged in quick, broken whispers. "Please stop." Elias's jaw tightened. From his position, anyone could assume he had stopped to watch, to linger, to commit some unmentionable act under the guise of rescue. That was the impression it gave. That was the impression Preacher Silas desired. Moments earlier, the preacher had stated the penalty was righteous, a lesson for any woman who dared disobey holy authority. The village people had moved away. Even the sheriff's deputy had looked aside. Now only the farmer remained, a man with no religious title, no sacred text, no justification for being there. Clara's voice shook again, softer, raw with terror. "That place is not permitted." Prohibited by the congregation, prohibited by promises she had made before she grasped the true cost of obedience, prohibited by a man who had ordered her strung up like a warning in the desert sky. Elias adjusted his position, his boots grinding into the ground, his hands shifted, gliding, pressing, finding stability where there was none. To Clara, it felt like an assault about to happen. To the unseen watchers in the trees and windows, it could only be interpreted one way: a farmer alone with a vulnerable woman, a prohibited touch and a boundary about to be breached. Her breath hitched as the rope squeaked above. She closed her eyes firmly, bracing herself not for hurt, but for dishonor. Elias finally spoke, his voice hushed, restrained, carrying none of the desire the moment seemed to suggest. "Keep still." The order only deepened the misunderstanding. Was he saving her or taking advantage of the one instant no one would dare intervene? The dust swirled, the rope strained, and in that singular, dangerous moment before the blade appeared and before the truth could surface, one query burned hotter than the sun itself. If a person keeps ending up in scenarios like this, hands where they should never be, individuals trusting him despite their fear, do you believe he is still innocent? Or do you believe he knows precisely what he is doing? Elias did not wait for the dust to settle. The rope was severed, the branch became motionless, and Sister Clara dropped into his embrace hard enough to knock the air from both of them. For a brief second, she was held against his chest, tangled skirts, pounding heart, with nowhere to look but up at his face. Then he set her down, firmly but close, closer than the villagers would ever tolerate. She attempted to stand, and her legs buckled. "Gently," he said. The word was plain, almost tender. To any distant observer, it could sound like something else entirely. The deputy cleared his throat. Preacher Silas remained silent. He smiled. Elias recognized that smile. It was the kind that waited for whispers to take effect. He lifted Clara onto his horse without formality, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She pulled back when he touched her again, not because it was painful, but because she remembered how near his hands had been moments before. "You ought not," she whispered, her breath shallow. "I know," he replied, already mounting the saddle. They rode quickly away from the mission's view, dust trailing behind them like a vow that would not fade. The ash trees thinned, the air grew cooler near the Red River, and the world felt less crowded, less monitored. Elias's ranch sat low and peaceful, nothing extravagant, just a veranda, a wind pump, and a patch of shade that felt like relief. He carried her inside and placed her on the bed, turning away long enough to retrieve water and a clean cloth. She watched him from the side of her eye. Men like him were not supposed to be careful. When he knelt to check the rope wounds, her breath caught again. The cloth of her garment had shifted during the ride, heat and movement unraveling what vows had tightly bound. She tensed. He noticed. "I am not here for that," he said, not looking up. His voice sounded tired, as if he had been defending himself from the same accusation his whole life. He worked swiftly, eyes downcast, hands steady. There was a moment when she felt the atmosphere change, when she knew he could see more than she wished him to. He paused, rose, and placed a cover over her knees without a sound. That small action perplexed her more than the rescue, as did the silence that followed. Outside, the wind pump creaked. Somewhere distant, a horse whinnied. "You should not have returned for me," she finally said. "They will talk. They already are. And I don't scare easily." She studied him then. This farmer with dust on his boots and reserve in his hands. The type of person who could make an error look like a choice, or a choice look like an error. As her eyes grew heavy, one thought refused to let her rest. If he crossed limits so effortlessly when no one was watching, what would he dare to do next? Once he was sure no one would stop him, Elias waited until the house was silent. Not the kind of silence that suggests calm, but the kind that means someone is finally sleeping. Clara lay still on the small bed, breath slow, lashes resting against skin still reddened from sun and fear. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, not observing her figure, but listening for pain, for fever, for anything that told him leaving would be an error. She did not move. That was when he made his decision. Elias saddled his horse without lighting a lamp. The moon provided sufficient light, it always had. He rode back toward the mission with a tight feeling in his chest he didn't bother to label. Men like him learned early that when something felt wrong, it usually was. The church stood still at night, all white walls and long shadows, looking harmless the way snakes sometimes do. The door to the rear building was still secured, the same one preacher Silas had gestured to earlier and called forbidden. Elias hesitated just long enough to listen. A dog barked somewhere behind the chapel, then went quiet as if someone had silenced it or given it food. He waited one breath, two, then slipped along the wall where the moonlight did not reach. The lock did not yield smoothly. It resisted him, metal grating against metal loud enough that he froze and pressed his face to the wood. Footsteps crossed inside the mission yard, slow and leisurely. Elias did not move until they faded. Then he attempted again, more gently, slower, as if he were extracting a sliver from his own skin. This time, the lock finally gave with a sound that felt like it reverberated. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old documents, and something sour that did not belong in a sacred place. He did not hasten. Hasting was for people who were afraid of what they might uncover. There were account books on the table, and it took him a moment to understand them. Names neat, dates marked, sums tallied, like someone proud of what they were concealing. Donations, levies, punishment administered, lesson delivered. Women's names appeared multiple times, always followed by notes in the same cramped hand. Elias swallowed. In the corner sat a container of personal belongings, a ribbon, a worn shoe, a prayer book with a page torn out. This was what forbidden meant, not holy, but hidden. He took what he could carry and left the rest exactly where it was. Let the preacher wonder how much had been seen. The return ride to the ranch felt longer, not because of distance, but because every answer came with another question. When Elias stepped inside, Clara was awake. She did not ask where he had been. She did not need to. "You looked anyway," she said softly. He met her gaze. Someone had to. Outside, a horse snorted. Somewhere down the river, a dog barked, then went quiet. If you are still following, this is a good moment to pause. Perhaps take a drink of tea or coffee and stay a while. If narratives like this appeal to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next part. And tell me something simple in the comments. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you listening from? Because Elias's next action will cost someone everything, and I promise this story is just starting. Preacher Silas did not arrive with a sermon, he came silently. The first sign was the horses. Elias heard them before he saw them. Leather creaking, hooves slow and rhythmic, the kind of approach intended to appear courteous. Clara felt it too. She was still unsteady on her feet, and she disliked that about herself. The rope burns had become numbed, then started pounding again as if her body recalled the tree. She was inside the house, seated because standing still felt like a risk, and her fingers clenched the blanket around her shoulders. "He knows," she said. Elias didn't ask how men like Silas always knew. 3 riders stopped just before the fence. Silas remained mounted, hands resting calmly, his smile already in place as if it had been rehearsed. "You should have left things alone," he called. His voice carried that composure that makes trouble sound reasonable. Elias stepped forward. "You should never have tied her up." Silas chuckles. "People get ideas when they witness things they shouldn't." The deputy shifted in his saddle. He looked like a man trying to remember which side would still be standing tomorrow. He did not look at Clara. Silas dismounted slowly, eyes moving toward the house, then back to Elias. "I came for what is mine, and for what you took." Elias felt the heaviness of the papers inside his coat. Clara saw the alteration in his shoulders, the way a person squares himself when there is no clean exit. The first punch came swiftly, not from Silas, but from the man behind him. Elias took it on the jaw and tasted blood, warm and sharp. His vision flashed white for a brief second, and he had to plant his boots just to stay upright. The second man rushed in. Dust flew. Someone struck the fence hard. Clara did not scream. She seized the lantern with both hands like it weighed twice what it should and staggered to the doorway. Her arm trembled, and for a second it looked like she might drop it on her own feet. Then she threw it into the dirt. Glass shattered, oil spilled, and fire climbed up as if it had been waiting. The heat pushed everyone back, and Clara sagged, knees folding, her strength vanished in one rush. For a moment no one stirred. Elias saw her begin to fall. That divided his attention, and it nearly got him killed. A fist clipped his ribs hard enough to make him groan, but he did not step away from her. He shoved the man back with one arm, and with the other he pulled Clara behind him, like his body was a barrier and she was the only thing that mattered. Silas's smile disappeared. "This is what occurs when women forget their station," he snapped. Clara lifted her chin, her voice steady. "No, this is what occurs when men hide behind a higher power." Elias lunged. He drove his shoulder into Silas, knocking him flat, the preacher's hat rolling into the dirt. The deputy paused. Then he saw Silas on the ground, dust on that sacred collar, and something in the deputy's face changed. The deputy spat to the side, eyes on Silas's swollen face. "I didn't agree to this," he muttered. He didn't draw his gun. He backed his horse up as if he had decided he didn't want to be recalled for this. When it was done, Silas lay breathing hard, dust on his collar, one cheek swelling fast. Elias was breathing hard too, and his side ached where that fist had landed. The men who rode with him retreated, suddenly unsure who they were working for. Elias stood over him. "This stops now." Silas laughed once, bitter and faint. "You believe the town will trust you?" Clara reached into Elias's coat and pulled out the account book. "They will," she said, "because they already suspect." The night became silent again, but it was not peaceful this time. Rather, it was the kind of quiet that awaits consequences. One of the men finally grabbed Silas by the arm and pulled him back toward the saddle. As Silas was hauled away, he turned his head just enough to look at Elias and smile again. "If you think this is finished," he said softly, "you don't know what I'm willing to burn." And standing there under the stars with smoke in the air and the truth finally revealed, Elias had to ask himself one thing. What will Silas ruin next now that he has nothing left to lose? The sun rose slow the next morning, pale light spreading across the ranch as if it were cautious not to disturb what had happened the night before. Silas was gone. So was the dread that had resided in the mission's walls. Clara stood on the veranda, bare feet on warm wood, watching the river move the way it always had, steady and indifferent to human shame. For the first time in a long while, she breathed without shrinking. Elias leaned against the post, coffee in hand, saying nothing. He set the coffee down, took off his old sun-faded coat, and draped it over her shoulders without making an issue of it. Then he walked to the fence that had been damaged in the fight, picked up the loose rail, and started repairing it, quietly and steadily. Some things didn't need speech. "You didn't rescue me," she said at last. "You merely stopped me from being silenced." He agreed once. That's usually sufficient. She had an option now, to return to a place that used regulations to hide cruelty, or to step into a life where faith meant standing tall, not looking down. Clara chose to remain, not as a sister bound by fear, but as a woman discovering who she was when no one told her where she fit. The town would gossip, they always did, but this time they would also recall. They would recall the preacher who said something was forbidden and used that term to keep others ignorant. They would recall the farmer who looked anyway, not because he was rash, but because he was prepared to confront what others avoided. Sometimes the correct action looks wrong initially. Sometimes the hand that reaches out looks culpable before it looks courageous. That is the moral here. Not about scandal, not about rumors, but about what happens when someone refuses to look away. We all have moments like that. A limit we are told not to violate, a truth we are warned not to touch. And sometimes the hardest part isn't the danger. It's the way people will view you afterward, like doing the right thing must have had the wrong motivation. So, let me pose a question to you. When you see something that feels forbidden, do you step back or do you examine closer? And when someone reaches out amid confusion, do you judge the hand or the intent behind it? If this story made you reflect, even briefly, please tap the like button. It helps more than you might realize. And if you enjoy narratives that stay with you and ask genuine questions, consider subscribing so you can continue listening with us. Tell me in the comments what part stuck with you the most. Was it the moment of doubt or the choice that followed? Because ultimately, this was never just about a farmer or a preacher. It was about bravery that appears imperfect and the quiet power of choosing to see the truth, even when everyone else tells you not to.